So a little funny story about me: when I was a wee child, I thought comic books were dumb, and that the art looked weird. I had never actually read a comic book, but I thought I was never going to because they were dumb and weird. Then I got older and started watching superhero movies for the first time, and I fell in love with them. But I still thought that comics were kind of weird and overly complicated, so I wasn't going to get interested in them. And then one day, my sister and I were in the library and picked up an XMen comic book, and the rest is history. I've mentioned before that it was through the comics that I became an XMen fan, and over the course of the 3 or so years that I have been reading XMen comics, I've managed to read quite a few of them. I got really lucky that my library had a ton of XMen comics, so many that I was able to read nearly the entirety of Uncanny X-Men from the 60s to the 90s, although there's a bit of a gap there in like the early to mid 80s, which I'm very upset about, but yeah. I've read some of the newer stuff too, although I generally find it a little more hit or miss, shall we say. However, despite my decent comics knowledge, I haven't talked a whole lot about the comics themselves on my channel, mainly focusing instead on the various adaptations of the comics. But today, I want to show a little more love to the source material and talk about some of my favorite comic storylines, or like strings of comics in a row, out of all the comics that I've read so far. The title is kind of vague because I wasn't really sure how to group this. Also, these aren't really in order because I didn't feel like ranking them, but there are almost 5 of them. But yeah, these are specific X-Men comics that I like. To start off, we have the 4-issue crossover X-Men vs. Fantastic Four from 1987, written by Chris Claremont and drawn by John Bogdanove. You can probably expect a lot of Chris Claremont on this list. This story takes place in the wake of Mutant Massacre, and thanks to an incident with an energy harpoon, Kitty Pryde is slowly fading away into nothingness. The X-Men naturally don't want that to happen, so they go to the Fantastic Four because Reed Richards is a genius, right? But old Reed is having a bit of an identity crisis, and the FF as a whole is just not in a great place, so conflict quickly breaks out between them and the X-Men. Since Reed is feeling too insecure to help Kitty, the X-Men instead go to Dr. Doom, and it's a whole thing, but Franklin Richards and Kitty are able to form a bond and convince the X-Men and Fantastic Four to stop fighting each other, and Reed gets over himself and Kitty is saved. I'll be honest with y'all, I can't fully remember the details of this comic because it's been a few years since I read it and my dumb library doesn't have it anymore, so I apologize that I can't fully describe the experience. But I just remember really enjoying the story, and that was mainly because Franklin is literally the most adorable creature to ever exist. Like, he's so precious. How can you not love him? As an X-Men story, I'll admit it's probably not the greatest. It's one of those hero versus hero crossovers that they make to sell comics, and those always have an element of dumbness to them, but nevertheless, this one was still a good time. The circumstances under which they get the heroes to actually fight each other aren't as bad as they often can be, I think, so that's something else in its favor. This is a pretty random entry, I'll admit, and I'm probably the one and only person who even cares about this story, but all I can say is that it's a fun time and Franklin is just so dang cute, so maybe check it out if you can. Next up is the limited series X-Men 92, written by Chris Sims and Chad Bowers, with art by Scott Koblish, Alti Fermansaya, and Corey Hampshire. Really hope I didn't butcher all those names. Anyway, this series of comics arose during the 2015 Secret Wars event, which I admittedly don't know a lot about, and it is based off of the 1990s cartoon X-Men the Animated Series. Although I think inspired by is probably the better term because these comics don't follow the same continuity or anything, they just use mostly the same characters and it has a very similar feel. Yeah, this entry is probably a little bit surprising because I haven't really seen people talking about these comics at all, but I honestly just love them. The art is really colorful and expressive, the X-Men themselves are overflowing with personality, and it is just such a treat for longtime comics fans. Like I said, it was inspired by the animated series and it very much has that same vibe, but it gets to be a little bit more edgy because it's not, a children's cartoon. I really love the characterization for the X-Men here. They very much feel like how they are in the cartoon, but I actually think the comic improves on the depiction of characters such as Jean Grey or Jubilee. And oh my, do these stories make my little storm-loving heart happy. Something that I really like is that it's not only homaging the beloved cartoon, but it's also kind of a celebration of the entire decade of the 90s, or at least the early 90s, but I don't blame them because, I don't even know what the X-Men were doing in the late 90s. But yeah, I love how they're able to kind of play around with these different elements of the canon and just pick out the best parts to use. Now it should be said that this story is definitely not groundbreaking in any way, it doesn't have anything super deep to say, and it doesn't have any impact on the rest of X-Men history because it isn't actually canon, but it's just so gosh darn fun. Like I said before, the art is popping and there are a lot of really epic moments, and it's honestly very funny and clever. My favorite part would probably be the second volume, The World is a Vampire. It's wild, and Storm gets to save the day, so obviously I love it. If you're a fan of the animated series or you just want some good lighthearted fun with the X-Men, you need to give them a read. And now we have the Dark Phoenix Saga, written by Chris Claremont with art by John Byrne. I mean, come on, did you really think this wouldn't be on here? And what can I say that hasn't been said already?
In so many ways, this is the quintessential X-Men story. Nearly every adaptation has included it, or at least referenced it, and if I were to ask you, name a well-known X-Men storyline, be honest, one of the first ones you'd think of would be Dark Phoenix.
And as it turns out, there's a reason it's so popular, because it's really good. I do think it could be guilty of being overhyped. I could totally see someone reading it for the first time and going, wait, this is what all the fuss is about? And I think that's just because it was so groundbreaking at the time and it's such an influence that it doesn't seem so remarkable today. But you really do have to understand the context in order to fully appreciate the impact that this story had. It did so many things that had either never been done before or rarely been done before, like taking an established member of the X-Men and turning her evil, then killing her. And even though Jean Grey has become a meme with how much she dies and comes back to life, I think it deserves some credit for the fact that Jean did actually stay dead for a few years. That's another thing I love about the story, the way it had a real impact on the X-Men going forward. Obviously, so much of Jean's character was colored by this event, but we also see how it affects pretty much every other member of the X-Men as well.
But if I were to say the main thing that I love about this storyline, it would have to be how even though it's so big and cosmic and the fate of the universe is at stake, it's also so intensely personal and character-driven. Like I said, Jean was already an established member of the team, literally one of the OG X-Men who had been around since day one, so we really care about her, and we have to watch her undergo this terrible transformation and sacrifice herself for the people she loves. It hits, and it hits hard. I've gone on before, at length, about my disappointments with how the movies handled this story, both times, but I really think the thing that they kept missing the mark on was just making us care about Jean. It's like they thought they could just say, Dark Phoenix, and have Jean die and people cry about it, and that's all you have to do. But no, sorry, it ain't that simple. If you don't care about Jean, this story means nothing. But it isn't just about Jean either. We very much get to see how all of the other X-Men feel about this situation as well. Something I really like about the final issue of the story is that they take the time to highlight each individual X-Man and what headspace they're in before the final fight starts. This is something that involves and affects all of them, and I love that the story takes a little time to explore that. And to look at it from a different perspective, there are just so many epic and iconic moments scattered throughout. From Jean's first emergence as Phoenix to Wolverine's epic solo takedown of the Hellfire Club to the final climactic battle on the moon, there are so many things which are just definitive of the X-Men. The art is stunning, and Chris Claremont's ever-flowery prose is arguably at its strongest. All these pieces just really come together to form an epic, exciting, emotionally moving story.
So obviously I recommend you read it, although I'd be somewhat surprised if you're watching this video and haven't already, but in all honesty, I recommend that you don't just read the issues that make up the Dark Phoenix Saga. Read the issues prior to this so that you can really get a feel for who Jean is as a character and her relationships with the other X-Men. Because you definitely can appreciate it on its own, but it has so much more of an impact when you really have the background. I'll also link a video in the description which goes into some of the real-world context surrounding the creation of this story, which is super interesting to learn about. So yeah, what else can I say? It's the Dark Phoenix Saga, and it is truly essential reading for any X-Men fan. I mentioned earlier that X-Men 92 is a great tribute to the X-Men in the early 90s, and it turns out that era as a whole is on this list as well. This is probably the largest and vaguest entry in here since it spans about 3 or so years and features writing from Chris Claremont, Scott Lobdell, and Fabian Nicieza, and art from all kinds of artists such as Jim Lee, Andy Kubert, Brandon Peterson, John Romita Jr., and a bunch of others who I cannot be bothered to list. Sorry. I think this era of the X-Men can be a little divisive among fans, but I have a big soft spot for it because they were among the first comics that I ever read. I don't know, it just makes me nostalgic for summer of 2018, leaving the library and sitting in a hot car with new comic books on my lap. However, nostalgia is not the only reason I like these comics. This was very much a new time for the X-Men. They were taking risks and trying new things. Some of those things worked better than others, definitely, but I respect the initiative.
Really, there are two things that I was focusing on when I was choosing which comics to put on this list. Character moments and striking moments that have stuck with me, and the early 90s have a plethora of both of those things. I just remember the general feel of these comics so well. The bleakness of A Skinning of Souls, the chaos of Fatal Attractions, the sheer confusion of Executioner's Song. It's true, not all the big crossovers or events of this time are big winners, but for the most part I think they succeed at what they're trying to do. And you definitely remember them. You remember Professor X getting shot in the chest. You remember Magneto ripping the adamantium out of Wolverine. Oh boy do I remember Revanche suddenly showing up in the Danger Room. That's a discussion for another time. Really, though, even with all of that, it is the characters that make these stories. New writers were coming in and taking over the 14 years of characterization that Claremont had given the X-Men, and I think they did a really good job of staying true to his foundation while also taking the characters in new, interesting directions. Stuff like the epilogue issue to Executioner's Song or the heartbreaking issue where Ileana dies are moments where it's just all about the characters interacting with each other, and I live for that sort of thing.
There was definitely some stupid stuff that came out of this era, but I feel like the stuff that was good has become really definitive of the X-Men, especially where the art is concerned, because the art from this time is fantastic, especially Jim Lee's. This picture right here, I would hang it up on my wall in a heartbeat if my cats wouldn't destroy it. Like I said, it really contributes to the whole feel and atmosphere, and a lot of those striking moments I talked about are so impactful because the art is just so good. So yeah, like I said, this section is kind of vague, but I think I kind of just appreciate the overall feel of these comics rather than a few specific ones. It was just such an exciting new time, and it's pretty fun to watch it all unfold. If you're interested, then you should probably check out one of the collected editions, such as Fatal Attractions or Mutant Genesis. Just don't bother with the Executioner's Song. It's not that good. Alright, so this video was originally supposed to be much longer, but my life has gotten a whole heck of a lot busier in the past few months, so it didn't quite turn out how I wanted. However, that simply means that there will one day, I don't know when, be a part 2 where I cover all the comics that I was not able to include in this video thanks to time constraints. But yeah, those are a few of my favorite X-Men comics that I wanted to share. As always, please share some of your favorites with me in the comments. I would love to see what you guys have to say. It's been really nice to make an X-Men video again. I know it has been a hot second since I've done that, and I apologize, but I'm very glad I could do this to close out the year. And man, what a year it has been. I truly do not have the words to describe it, both for my personal life and for this channel. I mean, we hit 100 subscribers, I had a great response to my super long Les Mis video, and I finished the project I've been toiling at for 15 months. Overall, it's just been wild, but also really great, and I would like to thank all of you for the 1000th time for coming along for the ride. Like, I know I've said this so many times before, but just the fact that there are actual human beings that I have never met watching little old me, it's insane, and I am so grateful for all of you. But yeah, things are potentially going to look a little different next year, but for now, it's Christmas, and I'm going to take this time to just chill for a bit. Around the first of the year, I'll release another video checking in and explaining how I plan to do things going forward. So once again, thank you all so much for watching, whether you've been here since 2020 or if you just got here, and I will see you all next year. Bye. Okay, this is your test. You're testing. I'm just gonna hang out back here.
What if you were just like that in the whole video?
The whole thing, I'm just back here, you completely ignore me, and I'm just like... Okay, and you need to read!
I know.
This is what this whole thing's for. This is gonna be blooper reel right here. When I was a wee child, I thought that comic books were dumb, and that the art looked weird. I never read a comic book, but I said I wasn't going to because they were dumb and weird. Then I got older. I do think it could be... Shut up. We also see how it affects pretty much every other member of the X-Men. Stop. I'll also link a video in the description which goes into some of the real world... Stop.
I don't like it when you mess up.
And how do you think that makes me feel, huh?
It's because bloopers are funny. Don't you expect people to laugh at them?
Not in like a mocking way. You jerk. Anyway, let me finish. And features writing from Chris Caramel. Stop.
It wasn't going as mockingly. I was just
Okay, just I need to make swift recoveries, okay? And you laughing does not allow me to make swift recoveries. Like I can just. It's better. It's faster. Do you want to play like Lord of the Rings or not? Okay.
Well, I'm gonna laugh, huh?
No.
So I don't have any enjoyment in my life?
Not while I'm recording. You're not allowed to be happy while I'm recording. Okay, anyway. And art from all kinds of artists such as Jim Lee, Andy Kubert, Brandy.
Such a fun girl.
I don't know, what am I saying?
Wow, you really don't have it, do you?
Neither do you, okay?
I never have it, so, you know what?
Oh, you're saying that I do sometimes?
Well, yeah.